Hello and welcome to our video on nominations. We're going to be getting into Chapter 9, and this is the first topic. Alright, let's start off with some general information. Elections, as you know, are going to form the foundation of any modern democracy. And the United States is special in that we have more elections than any other democracy, any other country in the world. And that has a lot to do with the structure of our system. With federalism, we have local and state and multiple national level positions open all the time. All right. The Constitution is going to set some broad parameters for states in terms of conducting elections. The Constitution does give some basic information of requirements for members of the House and members of the Senate, their length of term, and it also creates the Electoral College. But Congress really doesn't have a lot of power or control over elections in the United States. That's going to be left to the states. All right. Even though the national government is going to set a particular date, let's say for a national election, and that's going to take place on that Tuesday after the first Monday in November, that's kind of just a date. All of the states are actually running individual individual elections on that day. One of the things that you absolutely need to know is that in most American elections, it's a winner-take-all format. All right, the candidate with the most votes is going to win. The winner doesn't have a majority, or doesn't need a majority to win. Okay, doesn't have to have more than 50%. They win with plurality, which is the most votes wins. And a candidate can win with 35% of the vote. 40% of the vote, 45% of the vote. A great example of that's Bill Clinton, who won the presidency 2 times, and again, the Electoral College is what elected him. But when you look at the popular vote, he received less than 50% both times he was elected. Right? The other factor here that goes hand in hand with winner-take-all is the idea of single-member districts, which means that in any district or any geographical area, we are going to elect one winner. And that also reinforces our two-party system with the idea that there's going to be one winner, and there's really no split of power. You're simply going to have a winner and a loser. All right? And a great example that you'll see here on the slide is when the U.S. Census reallots or reapportions every 10 years, the states are going to divide themselves into geographic regions. For example, Virginia has 11 congressional districts. Each of those congressional districts is going to be winner-take-all, single-member district, which means there's going to be one winner. All right, the focus of today's slides is really going to be on nomination, which is the first step in the process. We're going to have nominations, campaigns, and then election. A nomination is a political party's official endorsement of a candidate for office. Winning the nomination is going to take a combination of multiple tangibles here. Money, media attention, and momentum, sometimes called the big mo. Campaign strategies are going to be formulated by these candidates and their campaigns to create or an effort to manipulate these 3 major factors so that their candidate wins. So they're going to be working to try to raise money. They're going to be working to try to garner or gain as much media attention as possible, and through those, with some luck, gain some momentum. And early momentum is going to be key when we're talking about the nomination process. One of the things that your book touches on that I want to mention here too is the fact that we have a ton of elections in the United States, and it is a grueling process. The other factor in a lot of other democracies and other countries around the world is the fact that elections only last about 60 days, in some cases 90, but in most cases 60 days or less. That's a very tight and short period of election. Here in the United States, our election cycle begins, and we're talking about presidency here, anywhere between 12 to 18 months out from that particular election. All right? We will begin to see candidates emerging for President Obama's position, which we vacated, following the midterm elections next year. All right, so when we talk about nomination, we're talking about competition for delegates. All right? And the nomination race is a lot tougher in a lot of cases than the actual general election when it boils itself down to the parties facing off for that position in government. Candidates, and the whole idea of this nomination process is to get as many delegates as they can. By winning a majority of delegates, they're going to win the votes of their party, and at the party convention, they'll be named the nominee or the candidate that's going to represent that party. From the 1830s all the way up through the late 1960s, the parties really controlled this process. So the political parties had ruled with an iron fist in terms of selection of candidates. There wasn't a ton of input from the outside, and party bosses, we talked about party machines in the last section, were going to have a lot of influence on who was actually going to be picked. And the citizens were not going to have much control, so the parties had a ton of power. That's all going to change in the late 1960s. And in 1968, the Democratic Convention, you're going to see the process is really the beginning of the opening of the process to the regular people. All right, and again, all the way up until this point, all of the major decisions of the political parties were done behind closed doors. With this Democratic Convention, the McGovern-Fraser Commission was created, and it was going to basically create a bunch of new rules that would open the convention and make it more representative to the general public. It was going to take input from the public, delegates were going to have more diversity, and this combination of the traumatic events of the late 1960s with Vietnam and draft riots, anti-war riots, the civil rights movement, you're going to see parties lose power and these campaigns be changed forever. Okay, this is going to end the elite party control of this process. And today, it's really it's more or less a transparent process where we know who's going to get nominated. We follow the race throughout the states. They tally the delegates, and we kind of know where everybody is. There's not going to be any real surprises at the convention, which back in the day would sometimes happen. All right, one of the last little pieces here that remains from this elite party power or party control is the idea of a superdelegate. Now, these were really popular in 2008 and could have had a big impact on the Obama-Hillary campaign in terms of who was going to get the nomination. Of course, you guys know that Obama ended up winning out. The superdelegates really were not an issue. This is a leftover of that old elite system, and the superdelegate is basically a seat that is reserved for someone who is very powerful in the party. Okay, it's like an automatic vote, an automatic seat. And these basically are given out by the Democratic Party to people who have key positions. It could be a congressman, it could be a former president, it could be a really substantial party leader. They're going to have a vote in the process along with those other state delegates. The Democrats use superdelegates more than the Republican Party. About a little less than 20% of all of the delegates are going to be actually picked from the party and then invited to the National Convention to go ahead and cast their vote. You can see there in a close race, they do have the ability to influence who is going to get that nomination. They can affect the outcome. 20% of the vote, 20% of those seats. It's going to be influential if they do use their votes and go ahead and possibly could upset one of the voters or give an advantage to one of those candidates. All right, we're going to be talking about caucuses and primaries. Caucuses are one way that states are going to allocate delegates. Between January and June of each election year, the individual states are going to choose how they're going to pick their delegates, either through the caucus or the primary process. The state of Iowa is first on the list in terms of the Iowa caucus, and it has a variation of the primary, which is going to be their caucus, which is a meeting. Under this format or system, local party leaders or party members are going to get together, they're going to meet, they're going to discuss a candidate, and they're going to agree on what candidate they're going to support. So it's not a vote, it's a meeting. These are not as common as primaries. They are time-consuming. They have very low turnout, and the party can have a lot more influence in these meetings than they can have with people individually going to the polls. These local caucuses or local meetings will pass them on to a regional caucus or meeting at the state level, and then eventually they're going to vote on the candidates and then to the state level, which is going to make a final decision on where the delegates go, who gets what. Generally, you're going to find caucuses in more rural states. The primary is much more common, and the primary began really at the beginning of the last century, the 20th century, as a result of the reforms of the progressive movement in the idea of opening up elections and giving more control to ordinary citizens. Okay, there's two kinds. We have an open and closed primary. We've talked about these a little bit. Closed primaries, if you are a member of a particular party, if you have to register that way, you must vote in that particular primary. And an open primary, you can go to the polls and you can decide when you're there which election you'd like to vote in. Virginia, for example, is an open primary. Closed primaries are much more common across the United States. New Hampshire is the first primary on the schedule. It gets a huge amount of attention, just like Iowa, since they're first. I think about a quarter of all news coverage of presidential races and presidential campaign, presidential election centers on New Hampshire and Iowa. They're huge momentum builders if you win. Okay, they create that front-runner status, and they can destroy a campaign with a loss. They are huge media events, and they really set the tone for image moving forward. There are a lot of states who have tried to jump up in the process and go first or go near the beginning of the primary season to have more relevance or influence, and this is called front-loading. All right, and this has happened multiple times in the last few years with limited results. All right, state law is going to determine how the delegates are allocated in terms of winning and losing. Democrats are going to require some form of proportional representation so that if you get at least 15% of the vote, you're going to get some delegates. Republicans give states a lot more control on how they give out or allocate their seats, their votes. They have more states that do winner-take-all elections than Democrats. And again, media focus in this whole sequence is going to be on the winner. All right, issues with primaries and caucuses, pretty self-explanatory. Way too much focus on small states early in the race, New Hampshire, Iowa. Again, these are very small states. They're rural. In Iowa's case, they're very rural, and they are not very diverse. It is a very long process. Again, someone who is in politics, who has a job, and is going to be dissuaded from participating because of how long they take. Money is a huge influence, huge factor, and it's a make or break factor. Voter participation is very low. 30% turnout for a primary is a good turnout. And then, of course, the final one, whereas the media has a great deal of power, through horse race journalism, they can label winners and losers, and that has huge impact on the election moving forward. Thanks for taking a couple minutes with me talking about nominations. We'll keep moving forward here with Chapter 9. Thanks.